Um, I believe we're good to go, right? Okay. So we're starting off. Sorry for the delay. We just had some technical problems in recording and transmitting the event, so we tried to sort that out, but it's done now. Professor Marion would like to open up and speak a little bit about the logarithm and the event, and then we can follow on from that.
Okay, I just would like to give the context of this event within the research put forward by the Lawgorithm Institute. And we are very glad and happy to have Professor James Parish from the Dixon Poole School of Law. He's a specialist and a professor on intellectual property. And I hope we will have here a very interesting discussion, mainly comparing the continental perspective and the Anglo-Saxon perspective for this new and very challenging problem about intellectual property and authorship regarding works generated by or with the help of AI systems. Well, this is an event promoted by the Center of AI and Art from the Lawgorithm Institute. The Lawgorithm Institute is an institute created by professors of engineering, computer science, and law, then later political sciences also. And the Center for AI and Art is mainly concerned with the question of authorship and what's the concept of creation. Therefore, we have brought artists to discuss the matter, also the view of those are of economists who are specialized in the arts market to bring also inputs about the incentives and the market, how it works. But the main question goes around this: what is creation? What is authorship? Both from the technical aspects of AI systems, from the intellectual production of the artist community, and also from the point of view of law. I believe the main challenge posed here by AI systems is that AI systems, they present some behavior, make choices, although these systems have no understanding, have no intention or conscience, which are aspects that the law consider essential for providing authorship. So this is a problem regarding the question on, could AI systems be authors? And if we don't accept authorship for AI, many questions arise. So who is the author of AI-generated work? There are many hands involved. The developers of the system, those who operate the system, the authors of the material which is used for training. These are very challenging, difficult, new questions posed to the law. Another important question is about the use of protected content to train AI systems. This data is essential for the development of technology. It's quite difficult to structure how could be these authors compensated. Is it a compensation in terms of an intellectual property infringement? Is it copyright infringement if I use this data to train AI systems for the purpose of generating further automatized work? So these are quite interesting and difficult questions. We would love. It will be very, very interesting to have the UK perspective and to compare with continental perspective and the Brazilian perspective, which is within the continental tradition. So I will give back to you, Igor, so that you can present properly our guest, and then we move forward with you as moderator, and Carolina, which is going to give the impulse for the debate after his presentation.
Again, afternoon. I did introduce myself. I'm Igor Borges. I'm a researcher at FGV, both the School of Law and the School of Economics, and for Lawgorithm as well. Today we'll have James Parish speaking. He's a lecturer in intellectual property and information law at the Dixon Pool School of Law. He holds a BA with honors in film production and arts from the Arts Institute of Bournemouth, an LLB with honors from the University of Glamorgan, and a Masters of Laws in Intellectual Property and Information Law from King's College London. He has completed his PhD entitled Towards an Understanding of the Distinction Between Limitations and Exceptions in International Copyright Law at the University of Cambridge, under the supervision of Professor Lionel Bentley. He's a solicitor in England, an associate for the Centre of Intellectual Property and Information Law at Cambridge, and an executive committee member at the British Library and Artistic Copyright Association. Yeah, it's a lot. In Brazil, we are very used to very lengthy introduction.
We have to use GPT to make a summary of his CV.
So Professor Parish will deliver his speech, and then we also have composing the panel, Ana Carolina Cagnoni. I hope I'm saying that right. My Italian is okay then. She's a lawyer and consultant in intellectual property law and innovation. She holds her master's in commercial law from the University of Sao Paulo and a Master of Laws in intellectual property from Queen Mary, London. She's certified as a innovation manager from the Copenhagen Business School, and she's a board member, member of the board of directors of the Brazilian Association of Intellectual Property, ABPI, and a deputy editor at the ABPI Journal. And then Professor Maranhão, you all know him. We recorded, sorry. We're just like, oh, that was the lengthier one. So, okay. Professor Parish will first speak. He's been assigned as much time as he wants to, well, around 30 minutes to speak. And then from there, we'll have a debate where we can interact in the most natural manner we can. Pass.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you, everyone, for making the trip to come see me today. It's very flattering. At any point, I'm going to speak for about half an hour, but I'm more than happy to take any questions or clarifications at any point throughout the presentation. In preparation for today, I think I produced 40 plus slides that contain pretty much every bit of legislative history that may pop up at some point during this conversation. I don't intend to go through all 40 slides. That would be quite descriptive and boring. But there are 3 topics that we want to look at. And if there's a bit that you want to dig down in more detail, just let me know and we can get into a little bit more detail about it. So as we were being introduced, there are 2 real interesting questions circulating in the copyright literature at the moment. Can artificial intelligence create a work that is capable of being protected by copyright law? And is it an infringement of copyright owners, intellectual properties to train artificial intelligence on their works without permission? Now, one of the things about today is that we're going to try and do a little bit of a comparison between what happens in the UK compared to more continental droit d'auteur systems. And so before we do that, I think I need to set the stage about certain aspects of UK copyright that may seem a little unfamiliar to you. The first point about UK copyright is that our central focus is not on the copyright author. the central focus is on the copyright owner. And the question we have is, how do you obtain ownership over a work, as opposed to how do you create authorship? Now, it's important to identify who the author is, because the owner can only take title, legal ownership, from the author. So the author is still the point of creation, the person who creates the work. But we're far more concerned with who the owner is and how they secure a strong title to the work. What this means is that in the way in which a UK lawyer will process UK copyright law is that we start first with, is there a protected work? Second, is that work original? And then third, we use that originality to identify who the author is and then figure out title from author to owner. And part of this owner-centric system is that we also have quite a weak moral rights regime that can be easily overridden by contract. What we want is the owner to have as much flexibility as possible to exploit the work. And so you need to have this different conception of UK copyright in mind in order to try and then understand how the system is working in a way that might be unfamiliar to people who are more author-centered. So the question of, can a computer generate a work, is a question about how can you own that work. So we're less concerned with, is the computer creative? We are more concerned with, how can we use the current legal regime in order to secure a property right in the output of the artificial intelligence? Questions are related, but the emphasis is different between the two. In this debate, and this debate has been happening in the UK for a very long time, I've been doing some extensive research onto the history of computer-generated works in the United Kingdom. And it was accepted that computers could produce musical compositions or drawings or short poems as early as the 1960s or the 1970s. They might not be very good, but the computer was capable of doing it. And so these questions have been around in the UK for a long time. And what is their relationship to this requirement of originality? Does a human need to create the work? Is the computer a tool? If the computer is a tool, how does the human show the relationship, the original relationship between them and the work they've created? But if the computer can generate works by itself without the need of any human input, what sort of legal protections can we put into place? So I'll spend a little bit of time talking about this debate. The second debate, as was pointed out, is about the text and data mining. Can you train artificial intelligence without the copyright owner's permission? Now, we don't have time today to get into contract law in the UK and about whether or not putting something on the internet comes with implied permissions in order to use that work. There's a big contractual debate about that. The general approach, again, in the UK is that contract always comes first. Freedom of contract is always the most important, one of the most important principles in the UK legal system. And if the contract is silent or you cannot prove an implied contract, then you come back to the Copyright Act to figure out, okay, what is the situation when there is no contract? But we're not going to get into that contractual debate. We don't have enough time. A short answer, but we'll look at it in a bit more detail, is that the UK does have some provisions that allow for text and data mining. We also have a strong understanding of the idea expression dichotomy, and this might give some additional flexibility as well. But there is certainly not a full-scale permission to text and data mine that we might find in a country like Singapore. And the UK has so far not followed its European cousins. Since Brexit, we no longer need to follow European Union law. The European Union has come up with a solution. The UK has chosen not to follow that, but it is left in a bit of a unsure state about what exactly the scope of protection is. So I'm going to start with this idea that the computer might be a tool, and this tool helps extend human creativity. If that is true, if the computer just helps extends human creativity, then there is a human in the center of the creating process. We can apply traditional rules that may have applied for in the UK almost 400 years, nope, a little over 400 years. And there's no gap in the law that needs to be solved. Now, this idea that a computer is a tool goes back at least as early as 1974. And it's been very influential, this norm, in shaping much of current copyright legal practice. I'm not going to, as I said, we're more than welcome to come back and look at the debates that was developing through the UK, the US, and internationally. But I want to have a chat about certain cases. Unfortunately, the picture hasn't come through on this. Okay. The picture hasn't come through on this, which is a little unfortunate, but that's okay. The UK has, at least to my knowledge, attempted to answer whether a computer is a tool that extends human creativity 3 times. There are 3 occasions to do it. The first in 1985. Now, the Express newspaper's case is a pretty fascinating insight into UK copyright protection. A newspaper wanted to run a promotional campaign. Its idea was that it wanted to encourage people to buy the newspaper every single day for a whole year. And so it created 2 million bingo cards. And it sent out the bingo cards to people all around the country. And then every day it would print a new 5x5 square inside its newspaper. And if your card matched up, you could win £1 million. Back in 1985, I'd imagine that's more like £10 million now. It was a large sum of money. And the question was whether or not these 5x5 squares and these bingo cards could be protected as works. Now, 1985 is a significant date for 2 reasons. One, it's before our most current piece of legislation. That happened in 1988. And 2, it's before the European harmonization of copyright, which the UK was part of. That happens in 2001, up until the UK withdraws in 2020. So there was no question in 1985 if a square of 5x5 letters, T, X, A, would be protected by copyright. One, it's identified. We start by identifying, is it a work? Yes, it's a work. ARAC would identify it as a literary work. And it would say that a table, a compilation of information, is a protectable work. We can protect train timetables under the old system because it is a compilation of information. We then applied the old originality standard, which was to look for labor, skill, and judgment. Was there some labor, some effort, either financial or time, that went into producing this work? Or was there some skill, literary skill or artistic skill? Or was there some sort of judgment that went into it? And the parties in the case aren't really even arguing. There's not really any argument about whether or not this thing is original. It is accepted that it will be original under the old UK standard. The question comes up about whether or not the use of a computer to generate the cards would deny copyright protection. The person who created it, Mr. Ertel, he first tried to create these 2 million cards by hand with the 365 corresponding charts. And he soon realized that this was going to be impossible, because either he was going to end up, no one was going to win, or too many people were going to win, and the newspaper would be bankrupt. So he needed a computer that could do all of the calculations in the background and set the right parameters for the game. He was the person who came up with the idea of using a program. He wrote the computer program. He checked the results of the computer program, and everything was good. And the judge in this case said, well, Mr. Ertel is the author here. You would not say that the pen that a writer uses is the author of the poem. And in the same way, you shouldn't say that the computer is the author of the grids. Always there's a human behind the work. And all Mr. Ertel has done is employed the use of a computer in order to produce the works that are required. So quite early on, we can see a generous interpretation as to what a work might be protected by. That a work would still be protected even if there's a computer involved. The next case is significant time-wise. Nova Productions, so this is Musema. So this is after the new Act in 1988, but still before EU harmonization. And the question comes up again about whether or not the use of a computer denies copyright protection. This is a game, it's a game of snooker. And the video game has, you know, an image of a ball and an image of a table and an image of a cue. And then it uses a computer program to understand the player's input, puts all of those images on top of one another and makes a composite image so you can give the impression of an animation. And the question was whether or not these composite images could be protected. And the answer was yes. Even though no human had put the different elements together, it was a computer that was putting the different elements together, there was still a person in the background, Mr. Jones, the game developer at Nova. It was under his oversight that the work was created. And therefore, he was considered to be the person who devises the look of the work, even though he has not designed any one specific element of the system. And the third case we want to look at is very recent. It's from last year. So this is post-European harmonization. Now, in the time between NOMA in this case, the UK originality standard shifts. And now, rather than looking for labor, skill, and judgment, we're looking for the stamp of the personality of the author that will exist through free and creative choices. And there'll be enough free and creative choices that they can call the work their own intellectual creation. It's a far more personality-centric, European-centric test. And it comes to whether or not this graph on the screen is a protected work. In the UK, we accept that this is visual, so this could be an artistic work. Can it be original? Now, to give you a little bit of context, this graph is absorbing data about the financial markets, stock prices and the like, and then giving graphic displays of that information for the user to understand. Well, someone, according to the court, one of the employees at the company, decided to make the lines green. Someone decided what the scale was. So even though we have no control over what information the graph is going to show, there is a tiny drop of creative choice in there. That line could have been blue, that line could have been red. There's a tiny drop of human creativity in there. And therefore, it's a human orphan work. You only need 1% human contribution for it to fall under the traditional system. So it's with that in mind that we then need to think about the UK's other system for computer-generated works. So the UK has a provision that says if there's no human author, then the work will be, if there's no human author, then the Act will deem the author as the person who took the necessary arrangements for the creation of the work. So they're not saying that the person who did the necessary arrangements is the author. What they're saying is that it's ascribed, it's attributed, it's a deemed authorship to another party, and this could be a legal person. But we have to remember that just that 1% drop of human creativity and this system wouldn't be working. This will only happen if there is 0% human creativity. And so far, no cases come up where this has been an issue. The issue of computer-generated work has been discussed in those previous cases I mentioned, but it was found in all of those cases that there was the drop of the human personality, so it was unnecessary. Now, how this system works is of much debate at the moment. I will come forward to what the UK IPO has been proposing. 2021, so what is that? Just a little over 2 years before ChatGPT 3 becomes publicly available. The UK is questioning whether or not they need to make a legal change to the system to remove the category of computer-generated works altogether because it's redundant. No one's relying on it. There is zero evidence that it's used in practice. Or whether they should keep it and alter its scope. And they are not looking at the creativity of the person who's using the computer. They're concerned with the effort, maybe time or financial, and the investment that has been put in to the creation of the work. And I think this really emphasizes that what the UK is worried about is investment protection. You know, if someone creates a work on a computer, examples from the legislative history include telephone directories, weather forecast maps, financial information. Perhaps someone needs to have ownership over this. Why should someone else be able to access the information for free without compensating for the investment that went into the creation of the work? As of the moment, the UK has decided to make no changes to its law, but it still thinks that some future amendments might be necessary. This was under our previous government. This was under the Conservative government. We've had a change of government earlier this year, and to my knowledge, the new government has not signaled what its intentions are. But the scope of the computer-generated works has become of much interest to academics and practitioners to see whether or not there is this possibility of a 0% human work, and if so, who can gain ownership of it. And as I suggested earlier, the digital landscape has changed quite significantly since June 2022. And we have had a large democratization of artificial intelligence technologies that now allow many people around the world to produce works. just want to make a point on this before we move on to text and data mining. It's not in my slides, but the UK has a conception that there's a difference between creating a work and fixing a work. The creation of a work might take years, it might take months, it might take seconds. But until it's actually recorded in a physical medium, it's not protected in our system. Once it's recorded, once there's a recording, then copyright kicks in. So there's sometimes we have protection for the musical work, but we'll also have protection for the sound recording. We will have protection for the dramatic work, the play, and then we have a recording, which is a film. And we also have a way of recording literary works, which is called a typographical arrangement. And we have a way of recording visual works in the sense of drawings or photographs. And if one was to interpret every digital image that the computer created as a photograph, there is leeway in the old system. The EU never fully harmonized photographs. It said that you could still have photographs for non-original works. And so there is a possibility, without even going to computer-generated works, that we could protect images through this sort of a little bit gray area of the overlap between UK and EU law. But maybe we could explore that a little bit later if anyone's interested. The second question is about text and data mining and whether or not it's permissible. Well, it is permissible in the UK, but its history is such that it's not really a direct parallel with the debate that's going on in generative AI. So we have a very narrow provision for text and data mining for non-commercial purposes. And the origins of this provision stems from the fact that the British Library was frustrated with its licensing agreements. It said that copyright owners, it did a random selection of 100 contracts and found that 90% of those contracts contained provisions that tried to restrict the ability of the British Library to engage with acts that it considered to be lawful. And so it asked the government to do something about this, to prevent restrictive licensing agreements. Now, as I said, freedom of contract in the UK is like principle number one. It's at the top. And this was quite a controversial provision when it was suggested. And Parliament thought that it could do with a lot more attention. And copyright owners really were very opposed to the British Library system. They said, you know, a contract can give much more certainty and clarity of what you can do. You can have a 100-page contract that details exactly what you're allowed to do. The British Library was making an argument that these contracts would cause a significant financial restriction on it, and it would erode its ability to serve the public. And the government were very sympathetic to this, maybe in part that libraries are publicly funded in the UK. And so this is public resources that are going into all of the license clearing. And so the government created a new text and data mining permitted act by regulation, specifically so that it could tie this provision to it to say, and a contract cannot override this activity. So there wasn't really a discussion about whether or not the activity itself was per se an infringement, whether it was prima facie infringement. What the Act makes clear is that if it's for non-commercial purposes, then you cannot alter that situation by contract. Now, the UK government were then considered, well, should we extend this provision? On the assumption, let's say, that an artificial intelligence company is not non-commercial, that they are operating for profit. On that assumption, should we be amending our legislation? And again, it gave three options. Make no legal change. Keep the status quo as it was in 2014. Focus more on licensing. Encourage right holders to create licensing systems, a market-led solution, a private market-led solution. To extend the existing exception to cover cover commercial research as well as non-commercial research. This would be the most favorable to artificial intelligence. Or to follow the European Union's approach of having a broad exception, but allowing authors to opt out of the system. So rather than it just being laissez-faire, the AI companies can do whatever they want, copyright owners could opt out by using technical means on their websites. So in 2022, the government decided that it was going to go full steam ahead with a very, very broad exception for any purpose. Again, 2022 is a very significant date because really what they're thinking about is text and data mining is in that sort of scraping academic texts or journals, or trying to find patterns in scientific information. Maybe this might help in, I don't know, medical research, for example. Yeah, they're not thinking about ChatGPT coming up. The creative industries, in particular, were very unhappy with this proposal. And not soon after, the following February, the government announces, look, there were voices that we did not hear at the time. This is going to take some more consideration. We're not going to amend the law. But what we're going to do is invite everyone to a round table. We're going to try and create a code of conduct. We'll get the IP, we'll get the IP holders in the room. We'll get the AI developers in the room, and we'll see what we can do. That code of conduct never worked. It was, I'm sorry, I've lost it here. February this year. Unfortunately, it's now clear that working group will never agree on a voluntary code. The opinions are just too divisive in this situation. This doesn't mean that the government has stopped working on it. It's just moved from the Intellectual Property Office to the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology and the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. But the UK IPO is no longer in the equation. It's gone into other areas, and we don't know what's happening. I've not heard anything more as to what's happening about those debates at the moment. So that is I'm sorry, it was just a couple of moments over. Thank you there in English, and the other word there is diolch, which is thank you in my country's language, Welsh. But I'm more than happy to take any questions that you might have on the topic. Thank you.
Right, I believe at this stage we start the debate. So, Ana Carolina.
Thank you, James, for your presentation and for your insights on copyright law in UK, which were very good to me because it brought me some memories of copyright law at Queen Mary almost more than a decade ago. And so much has changed. there are two things that we keep discussing in class when it comes to AI, and you touch it on both of them, but just to explore a little bit more, because we have a problem of copyright in the input, and we have a debate, not a problem with that, a debate, a discussion in the input and also in the output, right? And I wanted to hear you a bit more when it comes to output, because there were a couple of words that you mentioned, and I think it could be interesting to deep dive a little bit, as they are a different approach from what we've been studying, which is oversight. And then we've been reading some academics on the amount of control that the human inputs, that the human has over what the computer generates, how much it's used as a tool, in the sense that you control what is actually coming out of that, or you manage or you directed it, or how much you don't. And then you use the word oversight, which I thought it was quite interesting, because we're more used to hear the word control. And I think they're a bit different, right? When to control and to actually oversight. And
Yeah.
and also the thing on that I remembered is like skill, labor, and judgment, which doesn't have the creativity. So you don't where is the spark on copyright law in UK, if there is any, that you require to be protected? Because in US we see from Copyright Office that they are so much into the Supreme Court decision that there needs to be some amount of creativity. And when you say skill, labor, and judgment, it doesn't need to be creative judgment or skill or labor, but then you came up with the green decision on the green line on the graphic. Isn't it a creativity in it? But you don't use the word creativity in UK?
Okay, so yeah, thank you. So I'll start with skill, labor, and judgment. I think I've got to bring this a little bit closer. Can you hear me for this? Thank you, thank you. Okay, so as of last year, skill and labor is no more in the UK. There was a debate about whether or not the UK was going to go back to its old system or stay with its European system. It has stuck with the European system. So what we're looking for in the UK is the author's own intellectual creation. That's our test. We evidence that through free and creative choices. And the threshold to protection is that you've made enough free and creative choices to stamp the work of your personality. But we identify that there's a very, very low threshold in order to enter into it. So the choice to go with a green line as opposed to a blue line or a red line is a creative choice. There's a bit of a question that interests me. It's about whether or not what we're looking for is creative freedom rather than you've produced something creative, right? As long as you weren't restricted by rules or technicalities, you're working and you can make any free choice you like, then you most probably got room for creative ability. And so something like this graph could be protected. Traditionally, however, the labor, skill, and judgment test is it's a complicated history. We don't have enough time to go into it, but sometimes it's skill, sometimes it's labor, sometimes it's skill and labor, sometimes it's skill and judgment. And there's a real debate about what all of these things mean. But what we do know in the old system is that the work has to originate from you. It cannot be a copy from somewhere else. Okay, so what we're using the word original there to mean originate from the author rather than the person who creates the work is acting if you dictated a work to me and I wrote it down by pen, that does not make me the author of it. If you give me a drawing and I make a technical copy of it, that does not make me the author of it, because the work's not originating from me. So the exact balance in that under that old system, what labored skill and judgment is a little bit of a question mark. And as I said, that there's another very small question mark, that even though the new European standard applies for all works, there is a possibility for photographs that it might be different. And that's to do with a slight complication. In Germany, they had a two-tier system. Well, they still do. They have a two-tier system for photographs: creative photographs and non-creative photographs. Something that maybe a street camera might take, something that's completely non-creative. Yeah, it's like CCTV. Yeah. And the European Union didn't want to erode that distinction, so it allowed member states to have non-original photographs. And so there's a question there about, will someone come along who's a creative lawyer who says, oh, well, labor skill and judgment for photographs, labor skill and judgment was never altered because the EU allowed us to keep the previous system. And possibly, and again, if you can then link up that all of the output from DALL-E or Midjourney is a photograph, then you might be able to apply a much lower standard. Although it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't seem to get much lower than deciding that a line on a graph is green. So I would be surprised that the UK courts have shown a huge, they're very open to finding human authorship. And I think that trend will continue. And I think, what seems like magic today is a commonplace tool in 20 years' time. And I think this is just going to be a conversation that disappears because we're so open to finding human originality. I'm not sure if we were still in the European Union, whether or not our European cousins would agree that you look at that graph and you go, oh yeah, that's got the stamp of the personality of the author in it. I'm not sure they would necessarily agree, but this is what our Court of Appeal is saying at the moment, and there doesn't seem to be any appetite to encourage the UK to take a stricter approach to copyright. This is just a hunch. This is just a guess, but I would say that right owners are happy in the UK that we have a low standard of originality. More things are protected. As to your first question about control and oversight, it follows from that low level of originality. You don't need to control what that end product is going to look like. You've just got to have set one or two parameters in its output. And what we're seeing here, which is quite an interesting, the creativity that went into this software was into the words, into the code, and that choice in the code translated into a green line in an image. And so there seems to be a link between it's not exactly a prompt that you would use going into Gen AI, because you're specifically coding it there. But traditionally, we've had a distinction between literary works and artistic works, and you couldn't bridge the gap. But it does look like the UK courts are open to bridging that gap. So yeah, I would use the word oversight rather than control, because you don't need to control what the output is. You just need to give it a few parameters and say, there you go and do your thing.
And I understand the same way that you're saying, considering what you presented, and considering also that oversight being less than control, it it's more familiar to necessary arrangements. That is something that you already have in your law. So if you take necessary arrangements and you will, oh, today you can get protection, it wouldn't be a bit of a, not contradictory, but it would be to request more if you want to control it. And because it feels like oversight is closer to necessary arrangements on the protection for the computer generated that you already have.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, the incentive in the UK would be not to use Section 9.3, because if you use Section 9.3, you're going to get a flat 50 years worth of protection. It's a fixed term of protection. If you can convince a court that there's just that little drop of human creativity into something,
Right.
you've now got 70 years after the death of the author. So you've got a minimum 20 years extension, plus however long that person continues to live for.
Plus
So,
longevity wise,
Yeah,
as we're going
right,
to super centenarians.
and I think we need to think about this in an ecosystem where the doctrine of independent creation is significant, because if I can go to ChatGPT and I can say, give me a poem, press enter, and you go to ChatGPT and say, give me a poem, press enter, we can't have infringed each other because we don't have direct access to one another's work. We might have to have a complicated question about indirect access through the database, but generally speaking, we haven't had access to one another's work, so we haven't copied one another. And when we live in a world where, look, if you want a picture of a dog wearing a hat, go and ask the computer to give you another one, and it costs nothing. Why should we, if I've created one, why not give me protection to it? Because it cost you zero to ask the computer to create your own. And so I think, we're moving into a bizarre world where it's going to be easier to make a new work than it will be to copy. Right. And that's not a dynamic that we had previously, right? The previous idea was always that it was easier to copy than to create. But that's not where we are anymore.
Yeah, and then it comes to the input part, because it will be easier to create considering what was the input that made the machine learn what is a hat and what is a donkey.
Yeah.
Right. So and then it comes the input, because one of the things that it's a bit more intriguing to me is that, and you're right, it will be easier to create several different donkeys and several different hats.
Yeah.
But wouldn't we get to a point where what we want to create has never been thought before, and therefore has not been fed the machine? So in the sense that if it has access to everything that has been done, like, this is limited, like the database or the inputs. So I'm thinking a bit more far ahead, like.
Sure. So I hope that's true, that there is creativity that we haven't experienced yet, and that there could be new artistic movements and new styles of writing. And I think that we're entering a world where our assumptions, the most interesting thing for me about intellectual property, the advent of AI for intellectual property, is it makes us challenge very long held norms, right? So if we take the idea expression dichotomy, when I teach the idea expression dichotomy to my students, I say there's nothing new under the sun, but you can't protect style, you can't protect ideas, you can't protect genre, and it's all about taking everything that's previously existed and reworking it, right? But when we then move into the AI debate, we hear musicians saying, no, that's my style, that's my genre, that's my rhythm, that's my tempo. And these are things that we have long said fall on the idea side of the idea expression dichotomy. And now what we want, because there are lots of financial interests in this is to say, big tech, you've got to pay us for all of this training, right? If I go back to when I was in art school, as you mentioned, when I learned how to draw pictures, it's not true that artificial intelligence just looks at a photograph and says that's a dog, that's a donkey, that's a cat. It looks how to draw it, right? When I had to learn how to draw the body, I didn't just say, okay, now I understand what a person looks like, and suddenly I could draw one. I had to copy that line over and over and over again, right?
A lot of labor.
Yeah, I had to learn by, it's the same with music. You don't get the idea of music. Oh, I've got the idea of music, now I can perform. You sit at the piano and you perform that song over and over and over again. When we learn, we have to engage with the expression. We can't, I've had these little computer systems that, check I'm a human and say, oh, can you point out every single car in this little grid? Sure. But they haven't been saying to me, like, can you point out all of the Van Goghs? But because Van Gogh's style is more than just, it's more than just an idea. It was his way of putting paint on a canvas, and it was the way he expressed paint, his brushstroke, his control. And so when we say let's do a picture in the style of Van Gogh, I think we are starting to understand that the things that we have said in the human world are ideas because we don't want Van Gogh to stop the next generation of artists. In the digital world, it's all flipped on its head. Now all of a sudden, those are, because as I said, we are living in a world where it's going to be easier to create something new than to copy. And so once you flip that dynamic,
but not exactly new, right?
Well, I mean,
I think that's the thing,
they're
right?
not novel.
Yeah,
They're not novel in an originalities in a patent law sense, but they are original in a copyright law sense,
yes,
because
exactly.
copyright allows you to remix all of these ideas. And then when you start saying, okay, well, in the UK we have exceptions for parody, for pastiche. Well, I mean, what is a pastiche? What is a caricature other than just taking things that already exist and put them all together in a new style? So I think we are entering a world which everything is just upside down.
And is it exciting or frightening?
Oh, look, I come from a common law jurisdiction, but I most probably should have been born a German. I start with theory first and practice. In the UK, we have a joke about the continental system, which is this sounds really good in practice, but how would it work in theory? Like we don't worry about how it works in theory. We follow the money, right? We follow the economics of it, and so there's this real. I think one of the interesting characters of the UK system is it's always going to be pragmatically led. I explain to my students that UK copyright is 400 years of compromises between different commercial entities. It's not a coherent body of protection that honors the creativity of mankind. It's 400 years of trade negotiations, and that is the world. So we're not going to worry about, do we turn the systems upside down? That's not going to bother us at all. We're just going to say, okay, what's the best way of properly reallocating distribution? And for the government, I would imagine. I'm not speaking for the government. I've not spoken to anyone in the government, but I would say they've got a headline like, how do we increase revenue? Because we can take taxes from that revenue. And what is the best distribution? Is it better to give it all to the tech companies, or is it give it half to the tech companies, half to the creative industries? Right. This is not going to be about the protection of the idea expression dichotomy. And maybe it's not a bad solution. I mean, conceptually, it terrifies me because I believe in the creative soul of the author, but I also accept that the UK doesn't just protect Van Gogh; it protects train timetables. Right? It protects business emails. It doesn't only protect works of genius It protects hundreds of mundane things. The majority of your WhatsApp messages are going to be protected in UK copyright. Well, as long as it's so okay. So in a case called InfoPack, the seminal case of originality in the European Union, they say that originality can exist in something as few as 11 words, right? So yeah, I mean, depending on your message, it's true. But if you're living in a world where it only takes 11 words and it could be protected, you know, some of my WhatsApp messages will be. I don't know which ones, but some of them will be.
On the accounts that we are approaching.
Oh, sorry.
So no, but I just wanted to actually, I wanted to hear Professor Maranhão on this, because maybe he might have some insights about the continental approach regarding creativity, and perhaps that would be interested to hear his thoughts.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting and insightful, and I have taken a lot of notes here.
Good.
You were checking.
Good.
No, but actually, I would move firstly to ask the audience if you have questions or comments or criticisms to ignite the debate.
Okay.
Sorry, what's your name? Okay, it's Afonso Ferreira from CNRS, the French research institution, and he's asking what will be a computer-generated work which has absolutely no intervention by humans.
Okay, so from a matter of case law, no idea. Okay, so far nothing has depended on this provision. The lobbyists had a series of things in mind. They had telephone directories, which we have case law from all around the world saying is not original. You list everyone who lives in the town in alphabetical order. There's no creativity in that. They had weather forecasts maps in mind. Do you have little weather satellite stations all around the country? They all each individually collecting data. It all gets pulled to a central computer. That computer analyzes it. It says it's going to rain in the north. It's going to be sunny in the south. So they had ideas of these works that were being created without any need for a human to be there. This idea that you would have data that's spread all over the country, names and addresses, or weather information, and then you would centrally pull it together and turn it into a format that is legible for humans or digestible for humans. These were the sorts of things they had in mind. But these are things that have never been tested in the courts.
Yeah, just to proceed, because your example of your green dashed line is,
yeah.
I mean, so the thing is yellow in the map, in the weather map. So
yeah,
it does have creativity or whatever you define.
I think this. Right? I would completely agree. I completely agree. This is a difference between what the British Computer Society was worried about in 1988 and where case law has got up to in 2023. Right? We're almost 40 years past this, and these worries. The only, what it was is specifically only one lobbyist looking for this legislative. So I'll give a bit of background. The British Computer Society was a lobby group that looked after the interests of computer programmers in the UK. They no longer exist in their current form. They are now a charter that you can join to be registered, but they don't get involved in lobbying anymore. And they were specifically concerned about this issue. It was a very niche issue at the time. There wasn't much attention to it, but they were a well-organized lobbying unit with good connections with government. And it would seem that those connections were successful and the provision was included, even though the politicians at the time had exactly the same question as you. Is this actually even a thing? Is this ever going to be needed? And it's left in quite a bizarre situation whereby no, I don't have the slides, sorry. We're in quite a bizarre situation where in 1991, WIPO said they thought the UK's provision was premature. Technology wasn't in that situation. And therefore they weren't going to go ahead encouraging other countries to adopt it. And then we have back in 2022, on this slide, the government saying, but it would now be premature to delete the provision because we don't know what it's doing and we don't know where technology is going to be. So, you know, we've got arguments both on sides that it's unnecessary, but also to retain it from exactly the same point of view, because we don't know where technology is going to be. And so is this thing useful, or is it just like an appendix in our body that we can cut out without any harm? It's unknown. It's a big unknown within the system. Yeah.
Thierry, please first introduce yourself.
Professor Parish, this is Thierry Chamali. I'm professor and research in São Paulo School of Economics of Fundação Getúlio Vargas, and also here from Lawgorithm. My question is about one point you made at the end of your exhibition that is related to this matter of how the revenue will be distributed through the society. I mean, it just remembered me the book of the Turkish-American from MIT economist, the Daron Acemoglu, who just won the Nobel of Economics. And there is this recent book of him saying that technology used to be seen as like a fostering for social benefits and the progress. But it doesn't seem like that if you just look at the details. I mean, it's not something that is given. Like if you have the evolution of technology, we will have the social benefits. I mean, there is a lot of things in the midway of that. One of that is the law. I mean, the way that society wants to control it. And how it allows this new technologies to be free or less freer. I mean, and you just mentioned that probably it's not too important to think about the protection of the idea itself, but to guarantee that the system will be, I mean, the players, the part of society that are involved in this process will be somehow benefited, more or less, depending on where they are in this chain. But I mean, I wanted to hear a bit more about this perspective from your side, the law side, how it would be designed, what would be the criteria. As an economist, I think it's very important to learn the law side of this question.
Okay, so I think the first thing my PhD supervisor, Professor Lionel Bailey at Cambridge, once taught me is that humans can convince themselves of anything. right? If there's the desire to do it, they can convince themselves of anything. We thought the world was flat. We then decide it's round. We think we're in the center of the universe. The sun's in the center of the universe. Einstein tells us something, then Stephen Hawking comes along and tells us that that's completely wrong because of this. We can convince ourselves of anything, right? And I think this is an important thing in when I'm talking about turning the idea expression dichotomy in the head. It's a theory. It's a theory that's been useful for 200 years, but if finance is as such that it would be better to rearrange the whole system in a new way, then we will convince ourselves that that's the better way to do it, right? And so there's a worry about using theory to push the law, because we can always come up with a new theory to satisfy our needs. I think the other point is that I'm the other thing to bear in mind before I answer the question is that I am a big fan of legal theory. But I don't assign to one theory. I'm not a pure utilitarian. I'm not pure labor theory. I'm not a pure personality theory. I'm not a pure law and economics theory. I'm not a pure distributed theory. I'm a pluralist. I think there are dozens of theories that can explain the copyright system and intellectual properties generally. And I think this is important because not everyone in society wants the same outcome, right? You know, lots of different people have got different motivations for why they want protection, right? The creation of Gen AI is not going to stop 14-year-old boys writing awful love poetry to someone that they like in class, right? It's not going to do it. It's not going to stop people who want to get up on a stage from performing. It's not going to stop the painter who really wants to paint. They don't care about economic incentives. Then no teenage boy is refused to write a poem for someone he likes because the duration of copyright is 50 years after their death rather than 70 years after the death, right? The law and economics argument works when you're the Disney Corporation and you're deciding that you're going to invest 600 million into making the latest Avengers movies and another 600 million into marketing those movies. And you're not going to be able to go to a bank and get $1.2 billion without some sort of guarantee on a return. And so I think that the law will bend towards, in the UK, will bend towards where the money is. I think copyright plays an incredibly important role in allowing people to be employed within the creative industry, to make a living, and to earn a decent wage and pay for food and shelter. When I was at LIE last week, I heard a lot of very persuasive voices from South America saying, and particularly Africa, saying this is incredibly important to boost our economies and to have more employment. And so I think there will need to be some sort of distributive system for the money, but the problem is it's going to be way too complicated for anyone to manage. The only way that I can see it happening is that a new remuneration right is created. The remuneration right has to be competitive. What we don't want to do is to price human authors out of the work, right? We don't want computer-generated works to be so cheap that the supermarkets only play computer-generated music and not humans. You're going to have to balance the two systems. I'm not sure market forces will like that, but you're going to try and balance the system there so humans are as competitive financially as robots. But it's going to be way too complicated to run. So it would have to be run through collective management society. It would be a mandatory system. Maybe you could opt out of the system. And all of a sudden, you're at a situation where, from a contractual point of view, it's going to be much easier to license with the mandatory system for the computer-generated work. And so copyright can do all it wants to try and balance out the system. It's just going to be get much easier to access that work for the business people in the world and the contract people in the world and the managers in the world. And so I'm sorry that I can't give a I would love to see a world where there's protection for creativity, and I think it is important that intellectual property and copyright and moral interests are recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Okay, I think there is something important about that, but I think that the time has come that we're going to be priced out of the market, and I don't think it's going to affect the Ferraris and Porsches of the creative world. It's not going to affect the big singers and the big movie. And it's not going to affect the people who create without any incentives. You know, like I said, when I was 14 writing awful poetry, it's not going to affect that. What it's going to affect is stock photography. As we said, I don't need to go and pay Getty Images anymore for a picture of a dog. I just say, I want a picture of a dog, please. It's going to affect the low end. And the worry is the whole ecosystem is a pyramid. There's one great at the top because there's 100 low-end jobs at the bottom. And if you get rid of those low-end jobs at the bottom, does the pyramid still work, or does it all fall apart? I don't know. So sorry, it was a bit of a meander, but I don't know if I even answered your question. Sorry.
For sure. I mean, in this sense, maybe the government has a bigger role in order to control it. I mean, the laws and the rules should go straight in the way to prevent us to get in this situation you just told us. I mean, maybe the private sector won't follow it.
I completely agree with you, but that is a, you know, all I can say is I share the same valid judgments as you. I'm not convinced that IBM, Huawei, Microsoft, Google, I mean, how many companies can we name that's going to have the power to run artificial intelligence in the future? I'm not convinced these companies are going to have the same opinions. And my business isn't got a GDP greater than most countries in the world, right? You know, so I think, you know, it's going to be the voice of thousands of creators against a small company of tech, and it's going to be a really interesting way in which things develop. And I don't know, you know, Singapore has decided it's going to go all in on having a broad system, text and data mining for any purpose, absolutely free, do not need to get a license. Maybe the game is over because you just base your computer service in Singapore. Maybe we have a conflict of law issue and we need to deal about it from a conflict of law issue. But I think even if we regulate it now, in the same way, unless I get hit on the head, I can't unlearn what I had in art school. I don't think you can untrain the artificial intelligence, right? So even I think a lot of the damage, if we agree it's damage and not benefit to society, I think it's already done. And the global markets means that someone will want to take advantage of that situation. 199 countries go one way, one country goes the other. That's maybe all that's needed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe we're a bit over time by now.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm awfully sorry.
No, it's okay. I think it was everybody was engaged in the debate. Professor Madame.
Well, I'd like to make 2 questions if there is time.
Yeah, sure. I'll try my best to be as quick as
I would
possible.
like to hear, James, about 2 perspectives and reflections. The first one involves the opposition or the difference between originality on the one hand and novelty or newness on the other.
Okay.
If we take, for instance, ready-made art,
Okay.
of Marcel Duchamp's Urinal, for instance.
Yep.
There's no novelty. There's not something new that was produced, but there is his intention. Then we go to originality. There is judgment, and therefore there is something. There is a creation. When we ask about originality, we go asking about creation and, as you said, skill, labor, judgment, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we now consider AI-generated work, for instance, that a poem generated by GPT,
Mhm.
you have something new. There's no poem that is equal to that was the output of GPT. But maybe there is no originality.
Okay.
And so this is something that provokes us to reflect again about this distinction, to check, well, what are we handling here? Sometimes there is the author of the prompt, there is skill, there is labor on it, but sometimes there is not. So what are we protecting here? I would like to hear you a little bit about it. And the second one is about data mining and for the use of training, for the purpose of training AI systems. And there is this quite opposite tradition between common law in UK and in US, which is much more pragmatic and concerned about what is the purpose of the use. So is this purpose is going to compete or limit the gains of the original author of the data that is used to train or not? These are completely market-oriented questions. While when you look for the continental tradition, the perspective is not forward-looking, but backward-looking to the fact, as you said, the forward-looking question is, how am I going to promote creative freedom? The backward-looking from the continental perspectives, how can I protect what was created? And this is an expression of the intellectual originality or creation of the author. So in the continental perspective, there is much more rigidity, I believe, because you look for any procedure for the production of the AI system, for instance, the very storage of data to start processing and training a system is something that is already protected, for instance, in the Brazilian legislation that follows the continental tradition. This creates a lot of difficulty and very low flexibility to think about, well, is this generated work something quite different, a novelty, completely new, which are central questions to inquire about how will this affect the production of work in the future. And my question actually is the following. Maybe both traditions are not framing the right question, because if you I like the first sentence of the claim by New York Times against OpenAI. If you get their document, the first sentence is, "Journalism is essential for democracy." And actually, this is the very claim of the whole petition that they try to translate into copyright. They try to show copyright infringement there, but actually they are concerned about there is value created by this activity, and it's not fair because not everyone that has produced content that is used for promoting this activity is getting paid for that. This means any of the data that is used. So maybe the problem is not is something social and objective. It's an objective value that is here, not subjective or individual positions that are going to be protected. In any of these senses about how can I stimulate that author to produce, or how can I protect the personality of that author. But actually in this training, in the question about data mining, the question is, how can we have a fair distribution of the gains of producing AI systems? So I would like to hear about
Okay,
this.
so there's plenty of things in there. So first, I'm going to push back on the idea that author's intention is an important part of a copyright work. In the European Union and in the UK, we do not think a work should be based on subjectivity. You shouldn't have a work based on whether or not you intended to create it or not. Lots of great works might be created by accident. You don't need to be in the right mind frame. It shouldn't be based on whether or not someone else thinks it's good, whether or not the audience likes it. There shouldn't be any element of subjectivity in the work. In the UK, we have long held concepts of property law that says a property must be both certain and unified. And so what we're looking for in a copyright work is something that is certain and unified. So it might have been unified by the author around a particular concept or a theme or a motive, or but it's not about intention. The work can be created, and one of the puzzles I give to my students, it's from a case, is about you take the pile of bricks at the end of your road when you're building a house, or that pile of bricks is unprotected. You put the same pile of bricks into the Tate Modern in London, and it's an artwork and it's protected. What is the difference between the two things? Without it being authorial intention, because if it was intention, it would be subjective. Now, this is a fun game that I play with them. There is no answer to it, because 99.9% of the time we're dealing with things that are quite obviously protected. We're dealing with a book, a photograph, a song, a film. So we're not really questioning what subject matter is. We just assume that exists. But I don't think intention is part of it. So I don't think it's necessary that a computer intends to create something that's important, or that the audience views something with an aesthetic that, you know, an aesthetic can be subjective depending on the output. So I think the key in the European debate at the moment is that that robots are not persons, that they cannot stamp their personal touch onto it. So De Camp has done something personal to that urinal. He's written our mutts on it. He's put it on its side. He's put it into a new context, and that recontextualization is something creative and fun and playful. So there is something about what he has done that is objectively creative, regardless of his subjective intention. As for the differences between a sort of fair use system and a more prescribed system, my first point would be that according to the Berne Convention in international law, I would argue that more continental countries require a more flexible quotation system. The Article 10.1 of Berne is mandatory, and it tells them that they need to have a far broader system than a country such as France does. On the point of what the US has done with fair use, now I think US fair use is quite extreme. It doesn't necessarily need to be that broad. But what the US has done with fair use in the Authors Guild books, where they suggest that the snippet view, that you could text and data mine books in a library to give a snippet view and do search. Like I said, it's very similar to what the British Library was arguing back in 2012. This is talking about a different technology in a different world. And if we come forwards to the Golds, the Warhol case that's just happened, you can see that the court is they're not focused on whether or not the creation of the work, the creation of the defendant's work was fair. What they're focusing is on, was the use by the defendant fair? They are focusing on the exclusive rights. the author has created a derivative work and then they have licensed that derivative work. They are focusing more on how the work is being used in practice rather than the creation of the work. So the work may well be a very creative product, but once you start to compete in the same marketplace, there's a problem. And I think the US will perhaps be using this Warhol logic to come back a little bit on where it was in Google Books, because quite clearly there's going to start to be more competition in the market where there wasn't a competition in the market in the place something in the Google Books case a few years ago. On the stability AI point, I would personally agree that journalism is important to a democracy, but I would also imagine that a dictatorship would say journalism is important to a dictatorship, right? I think we should. I think it's not. Copyright should not be protecting the importance of journalism. Copyright, in my opinion, should be blind to quality, purpose, or merit of the work. It should just be about originality. And whether or not the thing that it was created has the creative touch to it to require to be protected. This goes back to the intention point. It doesn't matter why you create it. If there is personality in it, it should be protected. And on the point about the difference between novelty and originality, I would say that novelty is an expression, creativity, originality is an expression between my relationship between me and the thing that I create, the bonds between author and their spiritual child. And this is why we have a doctrine of independent creation. We can each have our own bond with our own spiritual child. Whereas novelty is about the existence of an object in relation to the whole of human history. Did that thing exist before, like we see in patent law? Has this thing existed in history or has it not? When we're looking at, I mean, look, WIPO had a really interesting approach to computer-generated works back in the 1990s. I think it's completely infeasible, but it's very interesting, which to say a computer-generated work is a collective work that combines thousands of people's creativity into one thing. So there is creativity in it. It might not be the creativity of the user who's put in the prompt. It might be the creativity of all of the people that's been trained that's been amalgamated into one. The problem with a collective work is that you then need to assign authorship of it, or at least ownership of it, to someone to manage it. And again, we get into this situation about how do you possibly license things if we believe that ChatGPT has created a work that bodies, I don't know, 2 billion authors worth of creativity. How do we properly attribute that creativity back to them, unless we base it on regular principles? So the output of the copy, is it substantially similar to a previous work? We assume that there's been access to the work because it's been on the internet, and we do the same test. The more similar something is, the more we can assume that there's access. So I think the point about the output of copyright works and infringement, we won't necessarily move the dial on that. The old tests are most probably sufficient to deal with that problem.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
We are well over time, but this was very interesting. I could see the whole audience very hooked up in the debate. I'd like to thank James for his presentation, Professor Maranhão and Carolina as well. This was recorded, so we will upload it. So if you want to market to people that weren't here but might be interested in the debate, well, please assist us doing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It was lovely. Thank you.